Now everyone has. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is Penina, mostly Penina. The Midrash is really about Penina, but Penina, who in this picture is hassling Hannah every year when they go up to the feast of Shiloh. And so here's the text that we're looking at. Sue, do you want to read? Sue Reese.
Sure. There was a man from Ramathaim of the Zuphites in the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Joram, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephraimite.
Okay, so notice, by the way, look at this genealogy. It's very interesting. And I think the importance of the genealogy is because this is going to end up being the father of Samuel. So it's important to give him, we don't really care who Hannah is, who Penina is, but the son, the father, of course, gets all of the, okay, go on.
He had 2 wives, one named Hannah and the other Penina. Penina had children, but Hannah was childless. This man used to go up from his town every year to worship and to offer sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. Hophni and Pinchas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord there. One such day Elkanah offered a sacrifice. He used to give portions to his wife Penina and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give 1 portion only, though Hannah was his favorite, for the Lord had closed her womb. Moreover, her rival, to make her miserable, would taunt her that the Lord had closed her womb. This happened year after year. Every time she went up to the house of the Lord, the other would taunt her, so that she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why are you crying? And why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons?
Okay, so what we have here is really very interesting. Let's just see what we have. So first of all, there are 2 wives. One is Hannah and the other is Penina. It does not say who is the first wife. The assumption is that since Hannah is named first, that she might have been the first wife. And the second wife is Penina. And that could be the assumption. And Penina is the one with the children. And Hannah is childless. Now, if you remember last week, we talked about the relationship between Sarah and Hagar, right? And we saw that Sarah was identified as a childless person. That was her who she is, right? Akara. And so we saw that there was a bad relationship between the 2 of them. And the one who has the upper hand is the one with children, all right? And now it's really very interesting that these 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, are fairly corrupt, right? And they actually take bribes and whatever, and that's not important here, but it is a little bit important for the future because, this is the environment that Samuel is going to end up growing up when he ends up in the house of Eli. All right. And so it says very clearly that Hannah is his favorite, right? Even though she doesn't have any children, right? Now, it's very interesting. It's the English translation here, for the Lord had closed her womb. The Hebrew is Vadonai Sagar Rachma. So in other words, Vadonai is the Vav does not necessarily mean that she's his favorite because the Lord closed her womb, right? It doesn't mean that in the Hebrew. The English makes it look that way, right? Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, it would almost mean that she is more like a sex object to him, right? That she's not for having babies, but she's for having fun. And so that I don't know why the 4 is here. But she is his favorite, all right? And almost maybe he was forced to take Penina as a wife because, right? Why? Because Hannah didn't have any children. All right. So, and of course, just like you saw last week, Hagar made Sarah miserable. Penina makes her miserable. La, 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 right? You don't have any children. The Lord closed your womb, right? Every year she would taunt her, and every year she wept and would not eat. Now, the comment of Elkanah here, why are you crying and why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? We could say, we could say two things. Oh boy, isn't he amazing, right? He loves her so much that he doesn't care that she doesn't have children. Or how else could we read this?
That he feels like, why does she need children? She has me. It's very self-centered, is the other way of reading it.
Right, okay. Why aren't you happy with having me as a husband? What do you need children for? Stevie, I see your hand is raised. You have another suggestion?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes.
Okay. No, the same thing I said about Abraham and Sarah is we don't know the daily, everyday routine and how he treated Penina and how he treated Hannah on a day-to-day basis. So we get one sentence and we're supposed to make a value judgment, or we're making a value judgment based on one sentence, and we don't know how he was. It could have been that he treated her specially and didn't treat Penina very nicely. And so Penina got back. I mean, we just don't know the relationship. We don't know what the dynamics were.
Right, for sure. But I would like someone to complete my Sue suggested one thing, but there's another possibility here, which is he's totally insensitive to her, right? It's a continuation of what Sue just said. Why is he insensitive?
He doesn't understand how important it is to her to have children.
Exactly, that having a child is your identity in those days.
And it's also your social security.
And your social security. And so in other words, so that when he says, so we could read this one thing, he loves her so much. On the other hand, he's not very sensitive, and that's not the right. Just by the way, we could play the game both ways, because I said about Abraham last week how insensitive he was to Sarah by not saying, wait, I love you and everything else, isn't it enough, right? Before he went and took Hagar. Okay, accepted Hagar. Okay, so I thought this was an interesting picture here. I'll show you the picture first and then show you the commentary. So here's a picture of Penina, right? What is she pointing to? Look at her outstretched arm. What is she pointing to?
Those are probably her children running around.
Her children running around, right? And here is Hannah, miserable looking and washing. Maybe she's washing everyone else's clothing. All right. It's not clear what she's doing here. It looks like she's washing, but and look. But what I thought was really interesting is this. I took this from a Christian commentary, right? And this is what it says here. He had two wives after the custom of that age, right? Penina appears to have been taken to wife, not out of lust, but for offspring, because Hannah was barren. Just as Abraham took Hagar, it was bigamy, yet it is not reprehended with God overlooking such. In other words, there's some value judgment going on here about having, it's bigamy, but oh no, it's not so terrible. In those days, it was okay. It's just, I love the commentary here. And he had two wives, as diverse other good men had in those ages, again, apologizing. And it's probably that he took a second wife, to wit, Penina, because Hannah, who being first named, seemed to have been his first wife, who was barren. Now, it's really fascinating because it doesn't say that she was the first wife. But this is the assumption that people have. And here's another picture, which I think is interesting. This is Elkanah with wives at sacrifice. This is from a Russian manuscript here. And so here you can hear that they're coming to the yearly sacrifice, and they're coming with their presumably this is Penina, maybe with all of her children, or here she's Penina with all of her children, and then presumably this would be Hannah in the red. I don't know why, and they're coming to make their sacrifice. Here's another picture, which is Elkanah asking his wife. This is a 17th century picture. That here is Elkanah asking Hannah, why are you crying? And here you can see in the background, this is Dutch, of course. They look like Dutch children. Look at these typical Dutch children, right? Look at the pictures, right? Anyway, this is a beautiful picture. Why are you crying, right? And here's another picture, which is really fascinating. You have here Penina and Elkanah and Hannah coming back to, returning to Ramah, where they are. Not the Camp Ramah, but the place. My grandson was here, was in Camp Ramah. And notice that, okay, sure enough, this is presumably Hannah wearing the red. I don't know, I guess they like red. And here is, in the background, here's Penina with another child, right? As just to pour oil on the water. And so if you look at Penina in the Bible, this is from the Jewish Women's Archive, and that's where I found that picture, right? Penina in the narrative is unloved and hated, but she's also fertile, right? So she represents a woman who accepts social paradigms without examining them, thus acting out the typical jealousy between co-wives known from the matriarchal text of Genesis. Isn't this fascinating? Where else do we have jealousy?
Rachel.
Rachel and Leah.
Okay, Rachel and Leah, they're sisters, and there's jealousy. There's also
Sarah and Hagar.
Sarah and Hagar. You also have a lot of bitchiness between perhaps Miriam and Zipporah. Maybe it's not clear, though. It seems as Miriam might be defending Zipporah, but it's not clear, because when she refers to her in Numbers 12, she refers to her as a Cushite, and maybe that's supposed to be, a negative, right? The fact that she's Black might be considered to be negative. It's not clear. But this whole idea of jealousy between, and then you also have the stories with the two prostitutes, with King Solomon. So you have, very often when you have women in the Bible, very often they're pitted against someone else, right? There's jealousy or tension, and which I think is even perhaps it's funny. Perhaps the only place where you don't have that is with Lot's daughters, where the two of them get together for a common cause of getting pregnant by their father. I mean, if you think about it, that's really, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other examples. Can any of you think of anyone else? Esther and Vashti, that's not quite the same.
I was just going to say that, Esther and Vashti, but not quite.
It's not quite the same. So, okay, anyway, I think it's very interesting. So, so you have here where Penina has prestige, right? And each child gets a portion, and each wife gets a portion. So the question is Penina taunting her because she's only getting one, right? Or are we supposed to be sympathetic to Hannah, all right? And so in the story, Penina comes across as being malicious, right? Whereas if you see what it says here, in fact, she is probably a literary convention, a foil for the independence and goodness of Hannah, all right? It does not suggest that she has an independent personality in any way. Okay, wait, I have to move your pictures away from here. All right, so she has no boys, and she's only mentioned as the second wife, the Elkanah, and the mother of unspecified numbers of daughters and sons, and the tormentor of Hannah. And as soon as Hannah has a baby, she disappears from the text. All right. In the Midrash, however, you have some interesting things going on. First of all, the Midrash assumes that Hannah was Elkanah's first wife, and they had been married for 10 years. All right, that's the assumption. Why 10 years?
Because that's, if a woman is barren for 10 years, the man can divorce her.
Right, and take a new one. Right, okay. And that's what it says in the Mishnah, okay, if you see that down here, okay. So another tradition has the initiative to marry Penina coming from Hannah, right? Her reasoning is if I tell Elkanah to take an additional wife, God will see that I brought a rival wife into my house, and God will remember me. Okay, so it's very interesting that you have here all the narratives, which remind us, according to the Midrash, of all those previous stories. All right, where if you take an additional wife, you'll end up having children. Okay, so you have here in the Midrash, Penina would get Hannah angry by saying, "Did you buy a sweater for your eldest son? Or did you buy a shirt for your second son?" In other words, she would really be nasty here. And this is the Midrash making Penina to be even worse, right? Or she would rise early in the morning. Aren't you getting up to wash your children's faces before they go to shul, right? To school, not shul, school. And so, in other words, all sorts of daily types of things would be part of her taunting, not just when they go to Sheila, right? So, in other words, and she would do this all, sort of in a roundabout manner. Okay, so the rabbis feel that Penina's conduct was the reason why Hannah finally got blessed with a child. This is the Midrash. God said to Penina, "You vexed Hannah, right? And that's why I'm going to remember her and bless her with a child." It's really amazing that they're turning that into the cause. A horrible Midrash, and this is why I put it in red. Louise, would you like to read this horrible Midrash?
Sorry. 1 Samuel 2:21 attests that the Lord took note of Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. The Midrash tells that when Hannah bore her children, Penina was punished. Hannah would give birth to 1 child, and Penina would bury 2. Hannah bore 4, and Penina buried 8. When Hannah was pregnant with her 5th child, Penina feared that now she would bury her last 2 children. What did she do? She went to Hannah and told her, "I know that I have sinned against you. I beg you, pray for me so that my 2 remaining sons will live." Hannah prayed to God and said, "Please leave her the 2 sons and let them live." God responded, "By your life they deserve to die, but since you have prayed that they live, I will call them by your name." Thus, even though Hannah bore only 5 children, she says in her song, "While the barren woman bears 7, for Penina's 2 sons were reckoned as Hannah's."
This is horrible Midrash. And this explains, go on, this Midrash explains.
This Midrashic exposition also explains the end of the verse. While the barren woman bears 7, the mother of many is forlorn. Hannah, who had been barren, had 5 children of her own and 2 more who were attributed to her, while Penina, who had given birth to many children, 10, became forlorn.
Gosh, I mean, what's with these rabbis? You wonder what's going on in their minds. Why can you think of any reason why they have to add and make Penina even worse than she is in the Bible? I don't know.
Maybe to control and scare the women who were in their world at the time.
Okay, good. Okay, and here in the Babylonian Talmud in Bava Batra, you have a completely different midrash, all right, which says that Penina's intentions were the sake of heaven, and she grieved Hannah so that the latter would pray to God. Penina wanted to aid Hannah, and she knew that only the latter's prayers to God could be of help. She therefore vexed Hannah at Shiloh, thereby causing her distraught rival wife to pray fervently. Thanks to Penina, Hannah's prayer was answered and she gave birth to children. Okay, so you have this, okay, so now we're coming to the fairly long midrash, which will probably take up the rest of our time. And this comes from Michal Lemberger's book called After Abel and Other Stories. It's a wonderful collection. And Michal Lemberger is actually won a National Jewish Book Award finalist. She was, right? And had honorable mention for all sorts of things, right? So her book got a lot of, was picked up and got a lot of good reviews. So she taught Hebrew at UCLA, and she teaches in Los. I should tell my son to look her up if she's still in Los Angeles. So I think she's not. I think she's actually in Boston. It was if Leah, who hasn't been with us for a long time, I think brought her to my attention years ago. So the Shiloh is the this is the opening that we read earlier. We don't have to read that, and we need 16 readers. So let me stop sharing just for a minute. And
Naomi, I can read. I'm on my laptop.
Okay, great. Okay, and here's Norman from New Zealand. So we have here one. Lisa, would you like to read today? I know you don't usually like. No, okay. So Susan Sferis, you'll be the first reader. Remember your numbers because you're going to probably have to read twice. The Sue 1, Sue Reese 2, Barbara 3, Joyce 4, Louise 5, Jill 6, Jerry Lynn 7. Francine, would you like to read?
Yes.
Okay, Francine will be 8. Yes, I'm doing it correctly. Norman 9 and Stevie 10. All right, and then Susan, you'll be 11. Sue 12. Barbara 13. Joyce 14. Louise 15. And Jill 16. Okay? So write down those numbers. I'm not going to remember them. Just keep in mind, okay, who you are. And let's go back to sharing the screen. Share screen. And we'll see it's a completely different take. Completely different take.
I start with this page.
Yeah.
Oh, this page or the one before?
This page.
Start here? Okay. For as long as I remember, my father's wives had agonized over me. They loved me, and so they tried to hide their distress. But I had eyes to see and ears to hear. I saw the shepherds at the well trace the shape of other women's bodies as they passed, their round hips swinging back and forth. I heard them discuss the finer points of one girl's poppy red lips or another's hair that bubbled over her back like a ripe cluster of darkest grapes. At those moments, I looked down at my body. My fingers pulled at the lank hair that clung to the contours of my narrow forehead and sharp cheekbones, or rose to my own mouth that I'd been told stretches too wide across my face. The problem was obvious. I was ugly in a region of women prized for their beauty. So I watched all the other young women be claimed as brides and ride off into homes of their own. As each left, I stayed behind, and I wondered if I would remain a burden to my father and brothers for the rest of my life. My mothers tried to console me. The men of this region know so little about women, they said. But there are some who have the discernment to know as that way a woman looks promises nothing about her ability to bear him children. But it meant nothing. They knew as well as I that a girl's looks were the currency she used to attract a mate. I watched them worry over my fate like hens clucking together over fallen seeds. Imagine then the excitement in our house when a man came to inquire about me. My mothers and I hid behind a door to watch as he spoke with my father. He was of middle age, older than I would have hoped for when I was younger, but I had accepted that whoever expressed interest in me wouldn't be one to make other women's hearts uneasy. His manners were fine when he ate and drank, but I got no more of an impression of him than that. Later, the three of them brought back more information. His name is Elkanah, the first said. He is not a rich man, with only 2 servants, a few acres to his name, and a small flock of sheep. But he boasts a fine lineage that goes back generations and counts leaders and wise men among his ancestors, said the second.
Okay, so now we have the first thing where we see some, relationship to the biblical tale of the lineage. All right, it would be interesting. I'll stop every now and then if we see something interesting that reminds us of the biblical story. Okay, reader 2.
And it is well known that he is pious and devoted to his first wife, though she has given him no children, said the third, who had given birth to me. Though she was my father's last wife, she entered a home in sisterhood with her fellow wives and was never treated as lesser than the others. My father said, yes, of course. Even a poor man is acceptable for an ugly daughter. My mothers fussed over me in the days that followed. They prepared baths of milk so I would go to my husband with skin as soft as a newborn calf. They mixed pots of coal and rimmed my eyes and made jars of perfumes that left me smelling like a field of wildflowers. They packed linen sheets and fine clay pots for me to take into my new home. Take these as gifts for Elkanah's first wife, my first mother said. The men can worry about bride price and dowry, said the second. She is the one with whom you will share your life. You will find a husband and a sister at once, as we did so long ago, said the third. She will become closer to you than your own heart. I believed them. They were my mothers and had seen all manner of men and women and had the wisdom of generations of mothers before them to pass along. What they couldn't prepare me for was Elkanah's first wife's beauty. She was everything I was not. Her skin glowed like sand under the sun. Her hair was as dark and thick as the deep recesses of a cave. Her neck rose long and straight above delicately plump shoulders. She was a delight to behold. I thought maybe that was why she didn't open her arms to me, but my mothers had warned me of that. First wives often don't welcome the second wife at first. After all, you are younger, and she has not had to share her husband with anyone until now. But wait, things will work out. Who knows a woman better than another who shares the same man's bed? I believed them about that too. They ran my father's household as one. All their children found refuge in any of their laps. The 3 of them spun around my father, the stars to his moon, but it was to each other that they were devoted. They shared the work of their lives and loved one another for it.
So here we have sort of a reversal of the story that we know already, which is the opposite here, that the first wives don't welcome the second wife. In the story, it was the opposite. And here too, she comes from a home where the wives got on very well. And so, she expected that would be the case as she continues. Okay, reader 3.
It wasn't to be that way for me. Childbearing came easy. Milk poured from my nipples and stained my dresses. My children quickly grew fat and content on it. Even before I weaned the first, I grew large with the second. And before I weaned the second, my womb was filled with the third. And so it went. I grew round with the seasons. At each birth, I held the warm flesh of my newborn against my skin and felt a newfound pride in what I was capable of doing. Still, Elkanah remained devoted to Hannah and did not come to love me. I took solace in my children. I gathered them around me, inhaled their smells, the dirt, milk, and traces of rosemary they trailed behind them. I told myself they were enough, that they were ample compensation for what was missing, but my closeness with them was never going to last. Already, my oldest were pulling away from my embraces. The boys turned their heads when I tried to kiss their cheeks. The girls walked with their heads together. I was left out of their childish confidences. It is as it should be. It is the way of the world. A mother brings her children into life and then sets them upon their way. They never could have been mine forever. My job, as Elkanah reminded me, was to push out children. My little breeder, he called me, and then took the flesh of my hips into his hands, squeezed lightly, although there never was much to grab, even after so many pregnancies. At those moments, my body bared to him, each fold of muscle and dimpled skin, a mark of how much I had given him. I could almost pretend that he spoke out of affection, but then he'd smack my rounded haunch and send me away. Let's see how efficient we've been this time, he'd laugh, then wait until I told him I was with child again. And so they came, girl after boy after girl after boy. Every time the midwife came to cradle me as I screamed a new child into the world. I knew the only power I would ever have, my only saving grace. After it was over, I could hold the baby to my chest, peer into its unseeing eyes and whisper, he may not love me, but I will do better for you.
Okay, so what we have here, just before we continue, I'm sure you all have noticed this, unlike the rabbis, unlike the text, she's a very, very sympathetic person, and we really care about her. And she's being mistreated. Penina, is being mistreated. Okay.
So let the others snicker as I pass. Let them call me a cow, my udders always swollen and full to bursting, a new infant strapped to my chest, another to my back, and the little ones tugging at my sides. Even here, where women walk swayback and big-bellied for most of their adult lives, I outshine the rest. But while the women laugh, the men commend me. They call me a credit to my husband. They don't know what I do. They have never watched Elkanah take Hannah's hand in his or kiss her palm. They have never seen him slide his fingers across her cheek, or the way his eyes brighten when he catches sight of her. They have never heard the laughter that comes from his room when she spends the night with him. I have lain awake, my children's breath a warm cocoon, listening not for the quickened breaths, the gasps or moans, but to their hum of their voices in the dark. It is then I wonder what it'd be like to have a man love me enough to talk to me, to open his mind to me. But I was not brought into his home for conversation. I was brought to give him what Hannah could not, and nothing else. He doesn't treat me badly. Anyone watching would call him an exemplary husband. My children are cared for, even the girls and younger boys who will eventually leave to make their own way. He even shows me respect of a kind when we are not alone in his room, where his body shows its desire, even if its heart does not. He makes sure I have grain to eat and wine to drink. You must stay strong, he tells me. Do not tire yourself out. It is all in the service of his growing family. But I take every sentence as a sign that he values me, even that doesn't add up to love, is some small comfort.
Before,
I help. Yeah.
before you go on, I what Elkanah really comes off here horrible. As a horrible person, really, in a sense, that he totally takes her for granted as a breeder, and just, and that's it. It's really it makes him very creepy. And thinking back to what I said earlier with Elkanah, sort of not understanding Hannah, here he comes off really and not understanding Penina. So in other words, if we would make a little picture around him, we might want to throw darts, at the picture on the wall. Go on. I'm sorry. Go on, Joyce.
I held out hope that my mother's words would bear fruit, that I would gain a sister in my marriage. I waited quietly, giving way to everything Hannah demanded. But after my third pregnancy, after the midwife had come and gone, and a baby's squealing cry filled the rooms and yards of our home again, she picked up Elkanah's name for me. Breeder, she said, your child has fallen. Go see to him. She was careful never to say it in our husband's hearing, so he never saw how it pained me, and because he never probed my mind, he didn't know how she had twisted the only bit of affection between me and my husband, between my husband and me, into a slur.
We have a total reversal of the biblical story here. Go on. Next, reader.
I was just a second wife. I couldn't even tell him not to share what happened between us, sparse as it was, with her. I couldn't tell him that I wanted something between us to be ours alone. Does a cow ask for privacy? Does it demand the secrecy of the bedroom? And so the years passed. I ballooned with life, leaked it, fed it, my womb never empty for long, and grew used to my own silences. Even my mother's didn't listen. Do not tell us of the difficulties in your marriage, they said when I cried in those early years. Do not invite anyone into your home life, not even us. You are a wife now. Your task does not begin and end in the bedroom. You must protect the boundaries of your household. In everything you do, you must remember your husband's good name. You must guard it as your own. It is yours now. After that, if anyone asked why my cheeks were wet, I said that I had held a crying child to my face. At night, their gentle snores covered the sound of my sobs. I loved each of them. I relished the tangling of my limbs with theirs, the way they fit themselves into my shoulder or curled against the curve of my hip. I gave thanks for their untroubled sleep, their trust in my presence. But each night I counted the days I had left with them, the nights they would lie with me. I dreaded the day that would surely come when my bed would be empty and I would lie alone, night after night, while whispers came through the wall from my husband's bed. Is it any wonder then that my sadness curdled into bitterness? Here I was, my body inhabited over and over again, each time a gift to Elkanah, and yet he still loved Hannah more. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop the tumor of resentment from growing inside me. Another fetus I carried alongside the others. This one never left. It had no 9 months gestation, no birth or growth outside the confines of my body. It stayed there, mutating until it filled so much of me that it became me. I felt my lips grow even thinner into the grimace of the aggrieved. Only my children brought laughter out of me. Only they saw whatever was left of the girl I'd been when I entered Elkanah's house.
It is an amazing description of the tumor of resentment. I mean, it's an amazing expression.
Wow.
So it's really amazing. Okay, next reader.
And still it was Hannah's complaints I heard. Give me a child, she cried to Elkanah. I am half a woman, she glared at him. Even Penina has surpassed me. And always he smoothed her hair. Shush, shushed her as if she were a child herself. Don't cry, he said. You are all I need. I love you more than any child ever could. He didn't understand, but I did. What was the use of being born a woman of the blood and cramps, the monthly cycle of expectation, if it ended with nothing? Within the depths of my heart, I agreed with her. She was not a whole woman. No one ever asked, so I never shared my thoughts. Maybe I was the only one to see it, but I came to know that together we would make a complete woman. I made the babies and she got his love. She got the better of the deal. My babies would grow and leave me. My body would stop making them, and I'd be left with nothing, just the memory of a time when I was needed. She would be treasured forever. The worst of it came when Elkanah packed us all up. Hannah, me, and the children took us off to Shiloh to give his yearly sacrifice. The babies cried, the children complained of boredom and aching feet. The donkeys brayed out of their protest. Their tails swatted back and forth over the haunches in search of flies to scatter. And all the way, Elkanah raised his hands to the heaven, sang his praise, and tried to get the rest of us to show some enthusiasm for our godly pilgrimage. I was always too busy to sing. It fell to me to pack our food for the trip, to ration it out over the 2 days' walk, to rein the older boys back in when they ran off the road in search of lizards to poke or the carcasses of animals long or newly dead. Look, Mama, they said at least 3 times a day, and then brandished a bleached thigh bone or dead bird, its neck bent or twisted to the side. I was too tired to ask if they had found those small bodies or killed the birds themselves. Hannah sat silently on her plodding ass. Always, her head hung, her eyes cast down to the ground. She seemed to follow only the shadows as they told the story of our progress. What she didn't do is offer to help.
So Hannah doesn't come off too well here, does she? Okay.
And every year, my hair, excuse me. All right. And every year, my hair thinned after so many pregnancies, and escaping in sweaty tendrils from the cloth I'd drape over my head to protect me from the sun. I came down off my donkey to build a fire in the evening, feed every one of us, prepare the beds for all my children. All the while Hannah sat morosely to the side, Elkanah holding her hand lightly between his, whispering in her ear. The children saw it all. He never accounted for that, but they knew how things were arranged in our household and punished me for it. Half the time the boys ignored me. The girls looked back and forth between Hannah and me, clutched my wrist or handfuls of my dress in their fists, unsure if they should shield or despise me. I dreaded the day they would find the words to ask what was obvious to anyone with eyes to see. Will I be like her, Mama, or will I be like you? Will I be loved? Every year I wondered at other people's blindness. The priest saw Elkanah's piety, the flawless all
You.
you the flawless you he led into Shiloh and up to their waiting altar. They heard his psalms to the Lord and joined their voices to his and ignored the pain of his careworn wife. Each year, the sacrifice was given, the meat cut off the bone, a portion for the priest, the rest for us. Elkanah watched carefully as the pieces were cut, one each for my children and me, a double portion for
Hey,
his beloved,
sweetie.
his Hannah. It had been years of this. Even as my brood grew and I increased our household with fine sons and healthy daughters, she found favor with him. Look at me, I cried out, a vineyard full to bursting, but you water that barren field even knowing it will give you nothing. I couldn't help myself. I could no longer be silent. Here we were in the most sacred of places, the ark of the Lord as witness to our good fortune, to give thanks and pray for more. We brought the best we had to sacrifice, and in return we got so much, but not from Hannah. She had nothing to do with it. She couldn't produce a thing.
Okay, so now we have a little bit of vestiges of, coming to closer to the story. Okay. Who's the next reader?
Then I
me.
became the villain when she pushed away her meal, her double portion of sustenance and love, because I said what was only true. Elkanah shot me with a look filled with more than disapproval, more than disdain. There was loathing in his eyes as he followed her away from the hearth, even as I knew he would plow my body that very night to reap the rewards of his holy devotion all over again. It was that look, the disgust, as if I, mother to all his children, meant nothing to him, that clashed my heart and shut my mouth for another year. But a woman can only watch as if from the sidelines of her own life for for so long before her silence becomes more than a lack of sound. It becomes a muzzle as on a dangerous beast. Do not be surprised then if the animal lunges in attack when it is removed. So it repeated. I grew heavy and gave birth. I worked. We went up to Shiloh. Hannah sat pitying herself, drawing attention to her own misery. I spoke. Elkanah, I said, more beseeching than in anger. Have I not given you what every man desires? Look at our children. Their faces are alight with life. See this one, and then held up the baby, still swaddled, only his face emerging from the cloth. See how perfect he is. Everyone comments on the way his face blends the two of us into one form. Why then do you withhold even affection from me? But Hannah had to be the center of attention. Even as I showed the world the contents of my heart, how it bent toward my husband, though he pushed it away. She went through her routine, the one that I'd seen so many times before. She sighed, pushed her dish away, and rose to return to her bed. As always, Elkanah turned to me. Can you not keep your mouth shut? It's because of you that she suffers. I wanted to protest. It is not my good fortune that closes her womb, but he had already run to catch up with her. They stopped there, enclosed in an embrace for all to see, while my daughters coiled themselves around me as if to protect me from life itself. Perhaps something snapped in her as it had in me, because she didn't lower her voice this time, didn't depend on his pity to bend his head closer to hers so that he could hear her every shuddered word.
Okay. So I want to skip. I know I see we're running out of time, and I want to skip a little bit towards the end because here we go. So she finally gets pregnant. Okay, so let's start. I don't know who's supposed to read now, but start from here. Whoever's supposed to read that vision of myself.
That vision of myself stayed before my eyes. For weeks, I saw it when I rose. I caught sight of that crone reflected in my children's eyes. Though they jumped on me, hung from my arms, begged me to swing them around as they always had. Only I saw this change. All the while, Hannah's skin flushed with color. Her cheeks looked redder, her skin plumper. She laughed as I had never seen before, not saving it for her nights with Elkanah, but out in the open. Soon enough, I saw how her breast swelled, and I knew, perhaps even before Elkanah, maybe even before Hannah herself, who had never felt the changes that pregnancy brings to a woman's body. There was great celebration in the house of Elkanah during the months before Hannah's baby came. He made sure she had cushions on which to sit, monitored her meals to ensure that she ate enough, placed his hand on her growing stomach. His eyes jumped in surprise when he felt movement there for the first time. My own belly lay flat under my hand for the first time since I had entered his home. He didn't come to my bed anymore.
Okay, continue reading here also.
I despaired of the future, of watching husband and wife focus on their darling child, while my children and I were left to sweep up the ashes of Elkanah's affection. During those long months of Hannah's fullness, I lost even my bitterness. Sorrow, I learned, is the stronger emotion. My invisibility had become complete, and since I could not be seen, I stopped attending to myself. I didn't bother washing my hair or clothes. I left my room only to cook and care for my children, then lay back down in my bed until evening, when I gathered them around me again for the night. No one took note of my absence. What I feared most was the day of the midwife arrived to help Hannah with her birth. Her son would become the princeling of the house. Her standing with her husband would be elevated even more than before. I was locked away in my own lonely misery, and so I missed the signs of change as they slowly came. Until Elkanah began coming to my bed again. So many months had passed, and the only touch I had felt was from children. It seemed as if all of a sudden he was ravenous for me. I never heard the whispering and laughing from his room when Hannah went into him. It took a few more weeks, and then one day I realized that she hadn't been in there since before her son was born. After that, I began venturing out of my room. I washed my hair, mended the rips in my dress. My entrance back into the family was driven by curiosity. I wanted to see what happened to drive Elkanah back to me, but this was the first thing that piqued my curiosity in so long that I snatched at it. Hannah seemed unconcerned. She sat by the fire with her baby, whom she had named Samuel, running her hand over his down-covered head, as taken with every sneeze, every smile, every shift of his arms or legs as any new mother. Our husband went about his business as he always had, praising the Lord for his good fortune. He didn't approach her or take the child from her arms to cradle him. He didn't bend over Hannah's shoulder to gaze at their precious boy.
Okay, so we have here something very interesting happening, okay? So Elkanah turns out that he ends up being jealous of the boy,
Yeah.
right? And he grabs her and is almost going to throw him against the wall. and it's Penina who stops him, right? And they pull the baby away from him. This is really fascinating, all right? And so what happens is that you have here something has happened to Elkanah. He can't stand her, or he has displeasure with her. What is so fascinating about this is that he is jealous, perhaps, right? And he becomes something evil, right? He snarls, spit flew from his mouth, right? And so he ends up feeling that he has to leave, all right? And so what happens here, what ends up happening here is, let's continue. I don't know who's supposed to be reading now. We're way over time, but we have 2 more pages. So who's the next reader here?
I was supposed to read after Stevie started.
Okay.
So start here?
Yeah.
Elkanah sucked in his breath. Hannah's face twisted at the cruel irony of the priest's words. But they gave me the solution to our problems, a way to protect the boy. Leave him here, I said to her after the evening meal. Her brow furrowed. It took her a moment to understand that I was what I was talking about. My boy, she said, and looked over to where he slept. Desperation and love seemed to seize her by the shoulders. I can't. God finally answered me. Maybe it would be nothing to you to give up one of your children, but he is all I have. A mother can't abandon her child. I had grown callous to her insults, so it was easy to ignore this one. If you love him, you will leave him here with the priests. Dedicate him to God. The priest said the boy is destined for great things. They can raise him to the fate better than we can in our small home. It didn't matter that I enlarged upon what the priest had really said, that I had blown his words up more than he probably intended. Hannah would believe anything about her son. Hannah hesitated, but she didn't turn away. She listened. So I kept talking. The priests will care for him. God will watch over him. He is not safe in our home. Soon even you won't be safe. When I made her the object of discussion, her eyes flared with some of their old anger. You just want him out of the way so that your children will be the only ones Elkanah cares for. I sighed. I had suffered so much at the hands of this woman, and still she abhorred me. But I was no longer the hated second wife. We were equal now, if only because our husband held back his affection from both of us. I have no love for you, I said. After all these years, she could not see the truth of our lives, but I am trying to help you.
There was no more for me to say, and I had to be back in my room. Elkanah would expect me to be waiting for him. Being in the presence of the priests and bringing the sacrifice seemed to have returned him to a semblance of himself. He remembered his piety, and with it his mood lightened. His caresses were gentler that night than they had been in months. I was almost deceived in believing there was some emotion in them, but I had learned enough by then to know better. The next morning, I was in a frenzy of work, packing our family up to return home. When all the donkeys were loaded with their burdens, all the children accounted for, and the innkeeper assured that we had left his rooms in good condition, we began the long walk home. I didn't notice Hannah until we were on the road. She sat on her donkey as if her body weighed too much for her. Her arms hung limply at her sides. They swung back and forth to the rhythm of the ass's footfalls, as if they were not attached to her shoulders. She looked ahead, but it was as if her eyes saw nothing. It was then that I saw her son was not strapped to her back. I looked again. Her arms were empty, too. She had listened to what I said. I marveled at it, but she didn't acknowledge me. I knew then that I would never learn what had changed her mind. As bad as things had been between us before, they were bound to get worse. She had sacrificed the best of herself, had lost her boy even if it was to save him. Even though I'd been the one to save him, she would blame me for his absence for the rest of our lives. Elkanah must have seen what she had given up for him, or known of her intentions before we set out. As always, they kept their confidences from me. He rode over to her, took her hand in his, and ran his fingers over the skin of her forearm. He pulled in close to her, whispered into her ear as he used to do. She didn't respond, but she allowed him to hold on to her, to adore her as he always had. Everything I saw was returning to how it had been, to normal. The road stretched out before us. We had 2 long days of walking ahead of us. I tightened the cloth that held my baby to me, felt the warm heft of her against my shoulder, and labored on.
Okay, isn't this an amazing story?
Yeah.
Right? When you compare it to the Midrashim, those horrible negative Midrashim of the rabbis, and even the story itself, one wonders what is the motivation of Lemberger, of Michal Lemberger, to write a story like this.
I think she's took the Elkanah's line about "Aren't I better than 10 sons?" and used that as the basis for his jealousy. I mean, he's already said, "I'm better than the sons," and then the son comes along, and suddenly the son is better than he is, or is more loved than he is. Yeah, so it really is a very interesting take on the story.
Absolutely. So in other words, the jealousy is, 1 second. No, the jealousy then is, I mean, but where did she get this idea that he would be an abusive father? I mean, and throw the child against the wall. I mean, where did she come up with that, and why? I mean,
maybe to give a motivation to Hannah, why she agreed to dedicate Samuel, hand him over to the priests.
Right. Notice that it doesn't have the whole story, if you remember, those of you who have been in the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, because this is also the Haftarah that is, this is the Haftarah that we read on Rosh Hashanah, together with the story of Hagar and Sarah, right? So it's what's missing is the fact that she was drunk, right? That Hannah was drunk, and that she gives up the child and her prayer, right? And her prayer. So God is totally out of this. All of the she totally makes this a secular, a secular story, right? Which I think is just fascinating. And her description is wonderful. I mean, and basically Penina is responsible for saving Samuel's life. So it's amazing, what Michal had in her mind to bring her back. Yeah. So it's really, thank you, Barbara. It's a lot to consider. Yes, absolutely. A lot. Okay. Well, anyway, we're way over time. So
Yeah.
I just thought it'd be, if those of you who have to leave, feel free. But if anyone would like to add something to this, feel free to react.
Thank you, Naomi.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Hey, Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
One thing I think it's doing for me, Naomi, and your whole class has been this way, is to take what I'm going to call them the